Hello and welcome back. This is part 4 of the 2021 Texas All-Region Etudes for Oboe. Etude number 5 is a 40-measure etude in the key of G major, mostly, and it is very taxing. It's a very long and slow etude. We're looking today at measures 25 to 32, the so-called recapitulation, because a lot of it is like the beginning of the etude. This section contains the most difficult rhythm to be found not only in this etude, but in all 3 of the all-region etudes. Now, before we get into the details, let's take a look at the counting of this section overall. Some of the notes are going to be so fast I won't give numbers or letters. I'll just give syllables. So let's follow along. 1 and 3 and 4 and 1, 4 and 1, a trill, 3, a trill, 1, digga 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 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and a 1. The first 2 measures, measures 25 and 26, will be performed exactly the same as the first 2 measures, except there's a little bit of a crescendo to shape the phrase. I've written it in the part, you can see it on the slide, and you can see the little wavy line to remind myself, hey, use vibrato during the crescendo as well. This crescendo should be added in order to create a long-term phrase of 4 measures from measures 25 through 28. You can think of it as kind of like piano crescendoing to mezzo piano. Now let's take a look at one of the difficult measures for rhythms, measure 27, the 3rd measure of the excerpt. If we take all the grace notes and the trills out, we have a very nice basic rhythm. 1, a 2, 3, a 4, 1. That's where we should start practicing. Now, let's take a look at that basic rhythm and add the grace notes. 1, a 2, digga 3, da da, digga 1. The final step, putting the trill in, will be dependent on what tempo you ultimately decide to use. A faster tempo, you may only be able to do 2 trills. And for most students, 2 trills will be enough. Even at a faster tempo, like the printed tempo of 80 to the 8th note, 2 trills still sounds fairly complete. As you can see, even at about 80 beats a minute, 2 trills still makes a musical statement in that measure. Remember, the sequencing is basic rhythm with no trill, no grace notes. Then add the grace notes. Finally, add the trill to it. Everything still must be in time through that measure, even with that little breath mark in the middle. Now we get to the most difficult rhythm in the entire composition, measure 28, the 4th measure of today's excerpt. The first step is to perform a trill on beat 1 that stops on the 2nd beat. 1, 2. You'll need to, with time, gauge how many trills to put in there. 3 to 4 trills is probably enough. The next step is to look at the 2nd beat. I've marked it for you on the music. So we have a rhythm that 4 times as slow would be 1 and 2 E and 3. So let's perform it 4 times as slow. Ready? Now let's speed it up twice as fast. Bum, ba da 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 da. Now let's think about it in context from a very slow tempo. Trill 2, digga 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 3. Without the trill. And for a long time, you should probably play it without the trill to get used to 1, 2, digga 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 3. The last 2 notes are very easy because you have a count and a half for the D and a half count for the D sharp. So you're going to spend most of your time practicing this measure. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 trills is enough for everybody. I'm sure for most high school students, 3 to 4 trills is going to fill up the measure and still make it sound musical. Let's take one more review about how you're going to practice this difficult measure. First, mark the beats on the music. Secondly, practice the first beat with no trill, stopping on the second beat. 1, 1. Now with the trill. Trill 2, trill 2. The second beat by itself, starting 4 times slow. 1 and a 2 E and a 3. 1 and a 2 E and a 3. Then double speed. 1 and a 2 E and a 3. Finally, beats 1 and 2. Trill up digga 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 da. Note that's going to take a lot of time compared to the rest of the composition. Finally, a tempo warning. I know that there are a number of overachieving oboe students that want to play everything as fast as possible, but this measure is going to determine how fast you play the entire composition. If you can only play measure 28 at 72 beats a minute and play it well, that's what you should do for all of the composition. Figure out early on how fast that measure 28 is going to go. That's the speed you should take the entire composition. Now let's take a look at the crescendo that's written at measure 29. You've got a breath mark at the end of 29, so the crescendo starting in 29 is really kind of illogical, but I'm going to play it once the way it's written. And you can see the breath mark interrupting the crescendo does not make a lot of sense. Instead, wait until the breath mark, after you take a quick breath, then start the crescendo, which makes a lot more sense with the scale that follows, the chromatic scale. Look at the skeleton of measure 30 for the phrasing and direction of the line and the crescendo. Notice I've circled the notes for you. After the breath mark, C sharp C, B, B flat A. It's essentially a chromatic scale. And you should be focusing on the skeleton before you put the high notes in it. Now for 30 going into 31, we're thinking about a goal. How far to take the crescendo? This is your last chance to impress the listener with your phrasing and your range of dynamics. So let's bump it up a little bit to all the way to mezzo forte. The skeleton first. With the high notes. For advanced players, you may wish to consider a tiny bit of rubato, retard, at the end of measure 31 to let the listener savor the loudest note of that section, the A. To practice it first, take the chromatic scale. Then try it with the high notes. after the A, go back to a tempo. Individual oboes will have to consider carefully if they believe they're at a level that they could pull this off and it would not sound out of character to a listener, especially a judge. Now let's take a look at the ending of this excerpt. There's a decrescendo written, but it doesn't really make sense to stop the decrescendo on the trill. Instead, the decrescendo should continue all the way to the end. You can also practice as a skeleton, just going A to G. Or regardless of whether you choose to use my suggestion for the dynamic marking or your own or for one of your teacher, set a goal for the decrescendo and the last note. The last note itself should of course be a full count at the end. Make sure that you use vibrato as well. Like I've mentioned on the previous videos for etude number 5, focus on your tone and vibrato before you try to do anything fast. For example, the first measure of this excerpt, play notes one count each, just to make sure that you've got a reed that's vibrant with a good sound, and then put the rhythm in after you play the notes all slurred out of rhythm. Use your journal to keep track of your progress, and you'll be proud of the accomplishments you've made in learning the all-region etudes over the weeks and months necessary to get them to a high standard for the all-region audition. Remember, be patient. Practice every day. This is the end of part 4.